Hello and welcome to GED Live. This social studies session is on visuals and data in social studies. So these are some of the things you're going to need to interpret to do your best on the GED Social Studies test. So as always, GED Live is brought to you by the GED Testing Service and Kaplan Test Prep. And I am Kaplan teacher Rachel, and I am going to work through some of these important concepts for interpreting visuals and data on the GED Social Studies test in this lesson. So what we're going to do here is to make sure that when you come across, right, make sure that when you're presented with visual information, whether it's a graph or a map, a cartoon, a photograph, right, really could be anything that's not just words on the screen, that in the same way that you do with text, you can figure out what the most important points are. What are the key takeaways from that visual data, from that visual information? Also, when we have information that's expressed graphically, using a graph or a chart or something of that type, you're going to have independent and dependent variables. So that's a pretty that's a pretty sort of scientific concept, but it comes into social studies as well, right? Anytime we're thinking about data, and social studies definitely involves data, you want to be aware of those different kinds of variables. It's not uncommon to have some kind of visual along with text. So that's going to require, in some cases, that you synthesize, right? To put together information from different sources, whether it's two visuals or visual and text. You're going to be called on to do that on the social studies test. And also, again, something kind of scientific, kind of mathy, but shows up on the social studies test is your basic descriptive statistics. So we're going to review the concepts of mean, median, mode, and range because GED social studies questions can ask you about that. So let's go ahead and get started with the types of visuals that you're likely to see. Excuse me. And visuals you may see could include graphs, could include maps, tables, charts, photographs, political cartoons. So no matter what kind of visual it is, you want to take a look at it, take a few moments to make sure that you understand what's there. Especially if you have a graph or a chart, you're going to be looking at things like labels and titles of the axes, the title of the graph itself, titles of the axes, what's being measured, that kind of stuff. And also titles and captions can be very important when you have any kind of a picture, whether it is a photograph or a cartoon or just an illustration. Again, if it's data that has anything to do with numbers, then you're looking for trends, right? Trends can be very important. We'll see an example of that later in this session. And if there are units that are of importance, then make sure that you know what those units are. Right? So again, these are different ways that visuals can be represented, or can be presented, I guess I should say. Now, specifically, when you're looking at something that is more of a picture, not a graph, not a chart, not a table, but a picture, here are the questions that you want to ask yourself. What's the theme? What is the idea that this picture is related to? Does the picture itself have any text in it? And if so, what does it tell you? And you'll often find that a picture is a picture is often part of some kind of opinionated presentation of information, or a presentation of information, a presentation of opinion, right? And so when there's any opinion, what you want to be thinking about is it kind of a positive opinion in favor of something, or is it more of a negative opinion that's going against something? Right? So are you supporting, or are you against? Or is the graphic supporting, or is it against? Now, you can sort of think about graphs, charts, and tables in some of the same ways, in that whatever's written there, right? Whatever titles, legends, labels you have, You want to make sure that you're paying attention to them, you're using them to understand what the information is that's being presented. Look for any trends, look for any themes, and think about, again, in terms of support, or does it support or does it refute? Refute meaning, to go against something. And so you can always have an issue or an idea that could be, the data that you're presented with really could go either way, okay, in terms of whether it goes along, whether it goes against. So let's take a look at this passage here. Now, we're talking about visuals. So far, you don't have any visuals, but because that's what this session is about, you can anticipate that there's one coming up. Okay? But first, let's go ahead and read this paragraph. I'll invite you to pause the video. You can come back when you're ready, when you have your own summary of what this passage is about. So pause and come back when you're ready, and we will continue together. So we read about World War I. There was this commission telling people to grow their own food. Okay, this was a way to support the war effort. How did it support the war effort? The passage goes on to tell us, right, with some of these supporting details. It was very popular, and here's why. If you had more people growing their own food, right, then all the food that was being grown on large industrial farms or produced in factories or whatever it might be, all of that other food, that mass-produced food, which by the way is cheaper, right? They could take that food and give it to the troops, making sure that the troops were, strong and well-fed, right? So fine, that's a good thing, but we go beyond that, right? Because then the money saved in feeding soldiers freed up resources for other military needs. So if you don't have to spend as much money on feeding your soldiers, you can spend that money on other things that might be useful in times of war, right? So freed up resources for other military needs. And so finally, right, we get this helpful little phrase in addition. Okay, one more thing about these war gardens or victory gardens, right, is that when Americans planted these gardens during World War I, they felt like they were doing something. They were helping the war effort. It gave them a sense of empowerment. Okay, that's a lot of information about these war gardens just in that one paragraph, right? And so let's go ahead and see what else we have to give us some background here. So here's our graphic. Again, feel free to pause, give this a look, see what it says on this poster, think about what the picture's communicating, and then we'll discuss. Will you have a part in victory? I'll tell you, this seed-spreading woman here looks very proud. And she is wearing a Stars and Stripes dress. All right. And so it says here, every garden a munition plant. That's a very interesting phrase in this poster, because it's clearly what we call a metaphor, right? A garden isn't actually a munition plant. A munition being weapons, basically. I mean, you think about the word ammunition, that's what you would put inside a gun, right? So munitions are just basically weapons. So gardens aren't actually munition plants, but right, this poster is communicating an idea about that to citizens to encourage them to plant these gardens. And in the points of view session, you'll learn a little more about this type of communication, where often a government or an organization creates posters and other kinds of media to persuade people to do something, right? So in this case, they want people to plant gardens, right? And we've just read about why they wanted people to plant gardens and what the benefits were of that. And so this poster, as the little caption, as our note here says, was associating, in people's minds, associating planting a garden with winning the war. Okay. So taking all of that into account, let's take a look what we have in the way of questions here. First of all, we're asked about how the poster is using the word victory. Now, this is a little bit different from a word and context question. Right? If you've done the question types and relationships session, we talk about words in context where you're actually looking for a definition. Here, notice that this question is just asking us how the word is used. Right? So, victory. I don't know, it's being used to encourage people, right? I mean, I said I don't know, but I do know, right? Using the word victory on this poster is telling people, wow, you can help us win the war. And that is supposed to be pretty exciting to the citizens. So what are our choices here? Ambiguous, meaning it's not really clear, what it means, right? Could mean this, could mean that. That's incorrect. And if it seems like victory here is a little bit, it's a little hard to know specifically how planting a garden has to do with victory. Well, you read about that. The passage told you about that. And so you can understand that in the context, right? This is what we call a primary source. This poster is what? Gosh, 100 years old now, right? This is a 100-year-old poster. And back then, those 100 years ago, people would have read this and said, would have had no question in their mind what this meant. Right? Commission wants us to plant a garden because it's going to help us win the war. No ambiguity there. Informative is way too neutral because a poster like this is designed to get people excited and, take advantage of their patriotism. So that's neutral, can't be correct. Answer choice C, propagandistic. So that's an adjective for propaganda. What is propaganda? Well, I was referring to it earlier without using the name. That is material that is specifically created to try and persuade you to think a certain way or do a certain thing. And we sometimes think of propaganda as a negative thing, but it doesn't have to be negative, right? Here, I think, we can probably agree that there was a positive aspect to this. I mean, no matter how you feel about war in general, if you're in a war, you want your troops to be well fed and you want to be able to at least defend yourself or take your part in the war, right? And that's what this allowed people. This is what people felt like they were taking part in. The government was trying to get them to do that. That's propaganda. It's answer choice C. And then finally, impersonal. No way, because that was part of the point of these propaganda posters, and you don't have to know that background, but what you can do is you can look at this poster and say, wow, that's not impersonal because it's saying, will you have a part in victory? Actually, very personally trying to speak to each person who looked at that poster, right? And have them say to themselves, yeah, I want to plant one of those gardens and help out my country. So that's our first question. So we're interpreting how that word victory is being used here. Let's see what other kinds of questions we might be asked. What is meant by the caption? Okay, so this caption, every garden a munition plant, again, could seem rather odd or confusing, but we read in the passage how gardens wound up being related to potentially weapons, right? So for this, we might want to go back to the passage itself, right? We might want to go back to the passage here where it says, in fact, this money saved freed up resources for other military needs. So besides soldiers, if you want to fight a war, you're going to need weapons and tanks and whatever else it is, right? Okay, so that's how we're able to look at this idea of a garden being a munition plant and say, oh, okay, well, what that meant was that people would grow their own food, it would free up some extra money so that the country could buy more, weapons, if you will, or in this case it says essential resources, right? So this is an interesting question, right? Because it is asking you to analyze a phrase that's metaphorical. But guess what? The test maker gave you all the information that you needed to answer the question. And the test maker will always give you all the information you need to answer the question. All right, so good. And right, that's really the only answer choice that even addresses this idea of a munition plant, right? Someplace where they make munitions, weapons, tools of war. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at one more question associated with this. It's actually kind of a good thing when you get several questions associated with one set of information, because you get a lot of bang for your buck, especially when you're paying attention and you have extracted what the important ideas are. So this question is asking what the author's primary purpose in writing the paragraph was. And I want to draw your attention to something here. And it's this phrase. And it seems like it's not that important of a phrase. I mean, it's the author's primary purpose. What's so important about that? I mean, it's the purpose, right? But be careful, right? Because there's a rather tempting incorrect answer choice here. So take the time that you need to figure out, well, first of all, go back to the passage. Why did the author write that? And then come back and look at the answer choices and choose the one that you believe to be correct. Pause the video, come back when you're ready. So this paragraph that was associated with the poster was talking about how this National War Garden Commission encouraged people to plant these gardens. Right? And all the author was doing in the passage, right? All that the author was doing in the passage was describing that to us. Right? So, just a neutral purpose, telling us about this interesting historical phenomenon. Okay? Now, when we look at the choices, answer choice A says to describe war gardens and explain their popularity in the United States. That's what the passage was about. Described war gardens, yes, and explained their popularity. Why were they popular? Well, they were popular because people knew that by planting these gardens, they'd be helping the war effort. Right? They made people feel like they were doing some good for their country. However, I think what's important to recognize here is that answer choice B often gets quite a bit of support. So here's what's really important to note. B says that the purpose was to encourage patriotism and continued support for a strong United States military. And so the really important distinction here is that this passage talked about encouraging patriotism and supporting a strong United States military. Right? It absolutely talked about that. But that wasn't what the author was trying to do. The author was describing how the National War Garden Commission was trying to encourage patriotism. So it wasn't the author who was doing this. In answer choice B, it was the NWGC. Right? So historically, this is what they were trying to do. Right? They were encouraging patriotism, not the author. The author was just describing what happened back then, 100 years ago. Okay, so in case B gave you a little pause and you said, that kind of sounds like it's got the right idea. Now you know that really important distinction. Whose purpose is it? That is crucial. The author's purpose. Okay. And, just glancing through these other answer choices here, distinguish the efforts of American citizens from those of citizens in other countries. Nothing about citizens of other countries in this passage. And rebut the accusations? Heck no. There was nothing about any kind of accusations that anybody was making. So C and D have phrases that very strongly allow you to just say, no way that's correct. Can't possibly be right. So good. So that's a lot of work on one set of information. Let's go ahead and move on and take a look at other types of visual data, graphs. And specifically, we'll think in terms of variables. Now, oh, excuse me. An independent variable is the thing that is changed during an experiment or as something is being observed, right? Because when you think of an experiment, we typically more think of science, right? In social studies, it's not so much that experiments are being done, but it may be that we're noting certain conditions, right? And so, or very often, the passage of time. In this year, here's where this value was. In this year, it had gone up. In the next year, it went down again, right? And so that independent variable would be the time. And as time passes, we're making our observations. And so I think what I'm going to actually add here is that it's a factor that's changed by the person who is doing the experiment or making an observation or measurement. Okay, obviously you don't have to be doing an experiment to have an independent variable. I just want to make sure that that's clear. So then the dependent variable is the variable that's actually changing. Right? The thing that we're interested in, the thing that is being measured, that we're trying to look at, okay, what kind of effect are we having? Okay, then there's a control variable, and when you actually run an experiment, and again, more on this in the science experiments session if you're studying for the GED science test as well. A control variable is simply a variable in which you don't change anything so that you can just observe what would happen and compare your experimental results to it. So, all right. You may have graphs, and if you have graphs, they will have variables of some type. And we'll take a look, shortly at that. Also important to keep in mind is this idea of combining information. And so when you have more than one source, just jot down on your whiteboard what each source gives you. And again, you don't have to write down a lot of detail, just write down what each source gives you, what kind of information, what's where. So that, when you do need to answer a question, you'll know where to go to get which pieces of information. And then when it comes to combining that graphical information with information that's in a passage, you're looking for the relationship. How is the graphic related to the main ideas of the passage? That's always going to be your number one question, because a graphic is never just, in isolation. It has to have something to do with the passage, right? And then you're going to take a look at those labels. As we've said earlier, right, you have to make sure that you're paying attention to what the labels are, what's being measured, and how does that relate to whatever may be in the passage. Are there any trends? And if there are trends, again, you just want to ask yourself, it's very often the case that data is provided to support a passage. But you want to watch out for a case in which the data provided may not support the passage, right? That's a way that the test maker can challenge you to make sure that you're paying attention, staying on your toes, and keeping your wits about you. And then finally, occasionally a question will ask you, either in science or in social studies, to extrapolate what would happen if the data continued beyond what's actually shown on the graph. So that's also something to keep in mind when it comes to interpreting charts and graphs. So let's go ahead and take a look at this piece here. As always, we have a little passage, paragraph, so I'll invite you to pause your video and come back when you're ready with your own summary of the takeaway, the main point here. So welcome back. This passage is clearly about sustainability. In fact, it's a definition of sustainability. We're told, we have this context right here. EPA says this is what sustainability means. Okay. And so what you want to kind of extract from this is the idea that sustainability has to do with the fact that we depend on our environment, right? And so for that reason, we should, as we have in our note here, protect our environment. And so the idea of sustainability is to, oops, sorry about that, to continually protect, create, and maintain, right? Make sure that the resources that we have are going to be sufficient for the people who need to rely on them, right? The resources that we have need to be sufficient for the people who rely on them. So, and your paraphrase of sustainability may have been different, of course, right? Because we're not in each other's heads. And as long as it captures that general idea, you're good to go. Okay? Now, let's look at this interesting graphic here. This question is asking us to do something that you're likely to see on the test. They've given us 5 graphics, but they're asking us to choose the 3 that are relevant. Okay, so I want to draw your attention to something here. Which 3 graphs relate to the concept of sustainability? And we know what that is. It means having to, enough resources, maintaining the resources that we have so that we can provide for everybody. Right? Now, the question says click on the 3 graphs that you want to select. But because of the way, because of the technology that we use in the classroom, although that's something that you'll do in your practice, it's something that you'll do on test day, literally clicking on the screen, we can't do that here in class, right? So what we're going to do is treat this as one of these kind of multiple choice Roman numeral questions. So know that on test day, you would just go ahead and click whichever ones were relevant, make sure you click 3, and you'd be done. But what we get to do is also apply a little bit of strategy. Right? So let's say you had this question, you've got these 5 graphs, you need to figure out which 3 are relevant. You'd start with the first one, I would imagine, right? Just a brief review of what sustainability means, okay, so that we know, what's going to be relevant, and then we come back to our graphs. First one is world population growth through history. Is it relevant? Well, if sustainability has to do with being able to have enough resources to provide for all of the people, then the number of people that we have is definitely relevant. Okay, so this first graphic does belong in our correct answer. And what that means is that we can eliminate any answer choice that doesn't have Roman numeral 1 in it. So that's answer choice B, right? This is definitely relevant. We can get rid of answer choice B. Let's go on to the second graphic here. Tropical area deforested over this 15-year period. Okay, well, how many acres of forest we're losing, that has to do with resources, right, that provide for us. So that's going to be relevant too. So we need to have 2 in our answer choice. So Roman numeral 2 is in answer choice A and answer choice D, but not in answer choice C. So we have to get rid of C because we need Roman numeral 2 in there. Now you may notice something interesting, which is that the 2 choices that are left, right, each one of them contains 1 and 2, right? But neither of them contains 3. And so if you had these 4 multiple choice answers with various combinations of Roman numerals referring to these various graphics, you would know you don't even have to look at 3 because none of the remaining answer choices have it, right? So you don't even need to look at it. Let's go ahead and take a look at number 4, because if 4 is relevant, we're done because we will be up to 3 and the answer is going to be answer choice D. So 4, global oil consumption. Relevant? Well, does it have to do with the resources that we use to keep ourselves going on the earth? You bet it does. Absolutely. That's relevant too, and answer choice D is your answer. And so I just want to note here that Again, we used some pretty cool strategy to figure out which was the right answer. But also, you may have looked at this and said, okay, deforestation, getting rid of trees, that's a resource. I get it. Global oil consumption, oil, that's a resource. People are using it. I get it. You may have looked at population and it might not have immediately jumped out at you as something having to do with sustainability, right? Well, guess what? If you look at 3 and if you look at 5, right, these 2 remaining, non-immigrant visa issuances. Well, that has to do with people migrating across, right? You get a visa when you go to another country and you're going to be there for some period of time, right? That certainly has nothing to do with sustainability. It's just people moving around. Doesn't have anything to do with whether we have enough resources for everyone. And US representatives by region, okay, people in the United States Congress, that's not going to have anything to do with resources or providing for people. And so again, if you needed to eliminate 3 and 5 such that only 1, 2, and 3, and then you might take another look at 1 and say, oh, of course, if we have more people, we're going to need more resources. That's relevant to sustainability. Okay, so great work here. Let's take a look at a excuse me, a different way of combining text and graphics. So again, I'll ask you to read this paragraph, come up with your own summary, jot a quick note on your whiteboard or on your scratch paper, and then come back and we'll discuss and see what else we have here. Now, what the test maker did in this passage, what the test maker kindly did for us is told us that suffrage is the right to vote. And specifically, we're talking about rights, equal rights for women. And so you'll see that this is the kind of social change and kind of series of events that the test maker likes to focus on. Right? Kind of big picture changes and events in United States history. So suffrage is the right to vote, and many people have worked on this. Okay. And then we hear that there was a great victory. That was the 19th Amendment. Okay, good. So a little more information about the 19th Amendment, some text from the 19th Amendment, and then this important word, however, right, which indicates to us that even though we've got this positivity with the 19th Amendment, maybe there's some kind of drawback or something that's not great, and that is that the struggle for equality continued. What a surprise. So the struggle for equality continued, even though there was this breakthrough. Okay. So, history of suffrage and the idea that, there continues to be struggle. So let's go see what other kind of information we have here. So here's a graph, and again, we're looking at the axes, we're looking at the labels, we're looking at the title. Number of women in the United States House of Representatives. And clearly we can see when we look at this graph that there is a trend. No question that over the time period that's indicated in the title, 1917 to 2011, more and more women were in the House of Representatives. Right? Number of women is on the y-axis. Right? That is our dependent variable. It's the thing we're actually measuring that we're interested in. And then our independent variable, in this case, again, we're not doing an experiment. We're just making an observation. Our independent variable is these sessions of Congress. We're just observing as time went by, and we had these successive sessions of Congress, 65th, 66th, 67th. They're not all labeled here because the numbers would have to be tiny and jumbled up, right? 66, 66, 70th, right? These various sessions of Congress, one every year, and we can see that this dependent variable of number of women is, bit by bit with some fluctuations increasing. Great. Now it's also good to note, right, we're asking ourselves how this is relevant to the passage that we just read, which was about the 19th Amendment. And so it's helpful to note that the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. Okay, so since the the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, and this is going from 1917, so just a few years before that. This is potentially quite relevant. Okay, so as we go forward in history, and as the number for the Congress session increases, because it goes, it's just goes year by year, more women in Congress. Okay, so together, what does this information tell you? And now this is a question in which you can make a pretty strong prediction of what the answer is going to be before you go to the answer choices. And whenever you can do that, you should do that, because it makes it easier to find the right answer. So what do the passage and graph indicate about the United States in the 20th and 21st centuries? Well, that's just, going from 1917 to 2011, going all the way from the 20th to the 21st century. What do we know? Well, we know that women got the right to vote, and we know that after that happened, the number of women in the House of Representatives increased. So if we look at our choices here, right, with respect to this information that we have in our chart, or our graph, I should say, and in our passage, what we can say is that, what do you think? So again, pause if you need to. If you don't want me to give away the answer, then pause and come back. If you give yourself a chance to think about it. But change in voting rights, that's certainly relevant. And is it in fact true that it had an impact on the representation in the US government? Representation meaning how many of what types of representatives we have? Absolutely. Yeah, here are your representatives. Here's representation. Changes in voting rights, that was the 19th Amendment, right? 19th Amendment here. And that's putting together the passage with the graph. Now, if you were tempted by some of these incorrect choices, again, you just want to be careful about choices that go beyond what you could infer from the information that you have. And so a choice like A is way too strong. In the context of the passage, we know that the inequalities were reduced, but halted is way too strong. We know that there are still struggles. Answer choice C. Principles are more powerful than democratic principles are more powerful than cultural traditions. Relative power of principles and traditions not touched by the passage, or the graph for that matter. And the Civil War amendments. That's not what this passage is about, right? Not even a little bit. It's about the 19th Amendment, right to vote for women. Okay. So anything, and again, this is in the question types and relationships session. Anything that's outside the scope that the passage doesn't provide you information about cannot be correct. So, good work here. Let's go ahead and take a look at our last topic for this. And this is where, for this session, and this is where we get a little bit, we're going to get a little mathy on you, because we have to talk a little bit about statistics. And so, we've got the average, right? And so to get the average of any set of numbers, you're just going to add up all the numbers and divide by however many numbers you have. To get the median of a set of numbers, you just put them in order and see which one is in the middle, right? So you arrange from least to greatest and see which one's in the middle. Now, if you think about that, if we have, let's just use some really simple numbers here. If we have, let me get my correct tool here. If we have 2, 2, 4, 6, 9. Let's say we have those numbers. And we're looking for the median. Well, the median is the number in the middle. So, fine. Middle term, that would be 4. It's 2 on one side, 2 on the other side. But if we have a set of numbers such as, let's just use the same numbers, but we'll leave one of them out. Say we just have 2, 2, 4, and 6. Well, then what's the median? Well, we're looking for the middle term, But when you have an even number, notice we have 2, 2, 4, 6. That's 4 terms here. There is no middle term. You can only have a middle term when you have an odd number of terms. So when you have an even number of terms, you just go ahead and average the 2 that are in the middle. So here, our median would actually be average of 2 and 4 is 3. Why is 3 the average of 2 and 4? Because 2 plus 4 is 6, and there are 2 terms. Divide 6 by 2, and that's 3. And we could get the average for this set. Right? We can plug that into this formula here, right? The average for this set would be 2 plus 2 plus 4 plus 6. I think I've picked numbers that aren't going to come out very nicely, but that's okay. The number's not important. The principle is what's important. 2 plus 2 plus 4 plus 6. That's going to be 14. So the average is 14 divided by 4. And we can reduce that to 7 over 2, and 7 over 2 is 3.5. Okay. So again, these are mathy topics. They're topics that you may expect to see on the GED math test and on the GED science test, but you may also see them on the social studies test. So beyond average and median, you want to just be aware of the mode, the value that appears most often. And so I deliberately gave you sets that had the number 2 appearing twice, so that my 2 sets have a mode, and the mode is 2. But sometimes you won't have any numbers that appear more frequently than the other numbers, and in that case there's no mode. And if I added a 6 to one, actually let me add a 9 to my first set up here. Actually, I don't even want to do that because it's going to change the median. But if I did have a 9 here, then I'd have 2 modes. My modes would be 2 and 9 because they each show up twice. Right? So that's your definition of mode. Now I'm going to back that up so it's not misleading. All right. So finally, range is just the difference between the largest and the smallest values. So again, to use my example in green, that kind of grayish green up above, the range, let's just call it R for range, is the difference between the largest and the smallest. Smallest is 2, the largest is 6. The difference is 4. The range of my green data set is 4. So now, let's go ahead and apply this in context to a pretty interesting GED social studies question. And here it is. So the question asks, which of the following could have been the median age in New Mexico in 2010? Which of the following could have been the median age? So again, you can pause the video and give yourself some time to think through the information that you have here in your graph and how you can use it to answer this question. Come back when you're ready. So we're looking for what could have been the median age. Well, right, you have to think about, you got to think about the definition of median, which is the value that's in the middle. Right? There's a value that's in the middle when we line up all of the values. So if in 2010 we could have taken all of the 2,059,179 residents or citizens of New Mexico and lined them all up from youngest to oldest, and then found the person in the middle and found out how old that person was, that would give us the median age. That's impractical for a number of reasons, not least because the babies would all be by themselves at one end and the moms will be somewhere in the middle, far, far away, and that's going to not make anybody happy, right? However, right, we don't have to go to any crazy lengths because we can just use some reasoning, use some math, figure this out using the calculator, right, which you do have access to. So, excuse me. If we know that there are 2,059,179 people total, well, halfway through that list is the middle person. So we can find out what the number would be of the middle person by just dividing by 2. Right? 2 million, blah, 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 divided by 2 is 1,029,589.5. Well, there is no 89.5 person, but that's okay. With this many people, it's either going to be the 1,029,589th person, or it's going to be the 1,029,590th person. That's not going to change the answer to the question, right? So we don't have to worry too much about that. So let's go. Oh, actually, I take back what I just said. It would in fact be it would in fact be the 1,029,590th person would be the median person, because we do have an odd number, so we could have a median person. Anyway, it's going to be in that ballpark. Well, okay. If we really did line everybody up, where would that person be? Well, first of all, we'd have the 500 some odd million under 18s, the minors, right? Then we'd have another 61,000, 18 to 19. Then in our 20 to 24 range, we'd have 142,370. And you're punching these numbers into the calculator. And as you add each number, you can see what your subtotal is, right? See what you're up to. So, okay, we're punching in. Let's punch in our 25 to 34-year-olds. And once we get there, right, once we add up these first four age brackets, 1, 2, 3, 4, here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see how those numbers match up. We are at the number 989,556. So we're very close to 1 million. And we're looking for the 1,029,000 something person, right? So what you're going to think to yourself at this point is, well, we're so close to 1 million now, chances are the person I'm looking for is in the next band, in that next age range, right? How do you know for sure, though, that the person has to be in that 35 to 49 age range? Well, if we don't include those people, we are at 9. Actually, let me use my other pen here. If we don't include those people, we are at 989,456. And if we do include the 35 to 49 age range people, right, we're adding a whole 363,362 people. Right? And so you may be willing to look at these numbers and say, that is going to take me so far that past that 1,029,589th person that I need. Or you can punch these numbers into your calculator too. And when you do, let's see here, 8, 1, 8, 2, 8, carry the 1. Looks like we're at 1,382,818, right? And so what you can see is when you add in those people, you have overshot the middle mark. And so the person who was in the middle had to be in that range. And that is why the answer definitely is answer choice D here. And so what you can see, and this is one of the things that we continually want to kind of remind you and have you take away from your GED live sessions, is that you do need to know the definitions. You know, these particular statistical definitions you need to know, right? And some certain pretty general facts about American history you do need to know. But for the most part, what you're doing is you're taking facts that you're given and you are thinking about them and you're reasoning and you're analyzing and you're interpreting and you're using that process to come up with the right answer. And, you know, as I'm fond of saying, the more you do that, the easier it gets. So again, just to reiterate the kind of skills that we worked on in this session, identifying key takeaways from any kind of visual data, right? We looked at like a painting, a propaganda poster. We looked at various graphs. We looked at graphs of different types, bar charts, you know, and in association with different paragraphs, putting that all together, right? So you want to be able to identify the key information from your graphics, and then be able to put that together with any text that you have, right? In some cases, that's going to involve making sure that you know what your different variables are. And then finally, in some cases, it may even involve calculating using those definitions from, again, basic descriptive statistics. So if you are ready and willing to do that, you can say hello to some more points on the GED Social Studies test. So in order to make sure that you feel comfortable, please keep practicing and attend the other sessions that are relevant to this test that you're studying for. And let us know when you have questions. We really love it when you come to the live sessions and log into the chat and let us know what questions you have during those live sessions. So if you have questions that are lingering after this session, you can pop in the next time this session goes live and ask us directly. Also, when you're not in class, you can always email us. This is our inbox, and this is monitored by myself and the other GED teachers and some of our awesome colleagues so that we always have an answer for you when you have a question. So please keep in touch, keep studying, good luck, and we look forward to seeing you back here again soon on GED Live.